President Cyril Ramaphosa will visit the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland throughout the course of the next few days. In fact, the two-day royal state visit will see Ramaphosa exploring new opportunities with these nations. Let's unpack the significance of this. Bring in Hermann Pretorius, who's with the Institute of Race Relations, joining us via our video link this morning. Hermann, great to see you as always. Thanks very much indeed for making time. Incidentally, this visit with Ramaphosa in the UK coincides with the publishing yesterday of a piece by the International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor, who spoke about countries in the global south being caught in some kind of tension because of geopolitics that's taking place in the global north. It raises questions about whether or not these kind of bilateral engagements are still beneficial to countries like South Africa or only serve those with power, and typically that's those in the global north.
I think that is a very important observation, and Minister Pandor isn't incorrect there. And it really is up to countries like South Africa to develop foreign policy that addresses a few concerns. Number one, South Africa's human rights reputation. Over the last few decades, especially the last decade or so, perhaps, South Africa has made a few questionable calls in terms of foreign policy. So if Minister Pandor is serious about taking the initiative in terms of the global stage in foreign policy, we have to reposition ourselves as someone who cares about democracy. And President Ramaphosa might have the precise exact reputation for that, having played a crucial role in the negotiation of the end of apartheid at CODESA 3 and CODESA 2, and of course the Constitution. The second thing that our foreign policy must achieve is to align countries to our trade and economic and investment interests. The third, of course, is the climate question, and then the fourth, of course, is the geopolitical concerns like something such as the Ukrainian military conflict. And these occasions could be an opportunity for either strong-willed African countries to reassert themselves on all four of these fronts, or they could be opportunities for the northern countries to, as it were, try and manipulate sub-Saharan African countries into a position of some more give or more take than necessarily give. And one hopes that President Ramaphosa can leverage the opportunity here to make sure that South Africa's trade opportunities, especially towards the EU and the UK, some of our largest trading partners, are, more beneficial to South Africans.
Yeah. There are either ideological positions to be taken. There are positions with economic considerations in mind that also need to be taken into consideration here. And often, sometimes, there's a delicate balance. South Africa, for instance, being criticized for continuing in one way or the other, having relations with Russia, given what's taking place in Ukraine. But those in support of that move said it made economic sense. How do we juggle these two issues, which may very well be at loggerheads at some stage?
I think that's a very important observation, especially if we look at how previous, especially American administrations, have treated South Africa when we have gone, a route different to what might have been expected from us, especially in the United Nations. We should remember that now President Ramaphosa being invited to the UK comes shortly after his invitation and his visit in September to the US. So quite clearly the US and the UK have found themselves to be in a position necessary to get President Ramaphosa and perhaps South Africa on board, especially with regards to our relationship with Russia and China, where in the past there was something of an antagonism. I think we are seeing the emergence of a more soft-gloved, kinder, more collaborative approach to get South Africa back on board. Now, President Ramaphosa has leverage in this. Whatever one's personal views might be of where South Africa should be on the Ukraine-Russian conflict, it is something that gives him some negotiating chips and some negotiating leverage in terms of saying, right, we are aligned with the BRICS countries, Russia and China included in them, but we also have ties with the West going back to the presidency of Nelson Mandela at the very least. And if you guys want us on an international scale to assist you in this regard, to abandon our position of some ambivalence towards the Russian agitation, then you must make it worth our while. Now, that's the problem with foreign policy. It is an ugly game. It isn't always about sound principles. It is what you can accomplish for your country. And this ambivalence could equip President Ramaphosa with some leverage, and we hope he can use it.
That's interesting. Speaking about the historical ties between the two nations, when Queen Elizabeth passed on, there was a lot of conversation around whether or not the UK has done right by South Africa, given its colonial history. I wonder whether or not this is the right time to bring that up when the President meets with King Charles III, especially when you think about the fact that this is the King's first state visit, or at least this is the King's first visitor who's the head of state, so to speak.
I think that's a fair point, and history is always interesting, and perhaps no history more interesting than the 20th century. We should remember that the worst sins of apartheid came after South Africa became a republic in 1961, at a time when Britain had less impact or influence in South Africa than when we were still officially part of the British Empire as the Union of South Africa between 1910 and 1961. So that doesn't immunize or protect Britain from all criticism in terms of its relationship with South Africa during the 20th century. But it is worth considering. But it's a very good point, and if President Ramaphosa can leverage that sort of commitment, making it clear, like he did with the climate question, that the First World owes some form of debt and credit to countries like South Africa, that would be to our country's benefit. Yeah.
One also wonders, though, given the UK's own, let's call it tumultuous year, at least politically speaking, whether or not this is the kind of visit that is important to them, certainly important to us, for obvious reasons, some of which you've outlined, but also because of just the dynamics between the two countries, even on a global stage. But Britain's had a year and a half, and I wonder whether or not Ramaphosa's visit in the next coming days is the kind of thing that they're stressed about or thinking about quite deeply.
Yes, no, I think that is absolutely right. And it is telling that President Ramaphosa is the first head of state to visit under the reign of King Charles III. So one might see Rishi Sunak trying. This is an old trope of politics. When things are unstable at home, you try to, with international relations and on the global scale, gain some political capital. That might be an opportunity for President Ramaphosa to do this. One reads in an excellent piece by Mr. Fabricius in the Daily Maverick a month or so ago that President Ramaphosa might be seen as somewhat politically weak in South Africa heading into December, and the US and the UK want him to be more politically strong. So there's an interesting thing there, but it's certainly worth mentioning that Rishi Sunak, on a similar level, just coming through his appointment as Prime Minister, just coming through the announcement of a budgetary approach that will see economic pain and unpopularity for the Conservative Party that is in government with Sunak as Prime Minister. It might be an attempt by Sunak to say, look, everything at home might not be hunky-dory, but we are re-engaging with old partners, we are re-engaging with partners like South Africa whose agricultural produce can perhaps, if properly exported to the UK, ease the cost of living to the UK.
So many different facets to this visit. Hermann Pretorius, thanks for your take. Really do appreciate your time on the AM Report this morning. Hermann is with the International Institute of Race Relations, I beg your pardon. Thanks very much indeed.